A feast of love, a world of martial heroes. There are newcomers laughing, and there are old ones weeping. In my prime years, I chose to indulge, obtaining everything I desired. The first time I met Carlton, it was winter. Snow was falling outside, and I was wearing a silk-padded qipao. Between us was a steaming tea table. He said he needed a woman like me. I smiled a smile I had practiced countless times in front of the mirror. My sister Chaya said it was enough to be called a smile that could topple a city. Carlton paused when he saw my smile, his eyes shining even brighter than the thick chain around his neck. Honestly, I felt a little regret inside. After all, it was my first time, and I had given it to this man. Carlton wasn't ugly, and his physique wasn't bad for his age, pretty decent. Actually, he was still in his 50s, a little old for my taste. He was in construction, dabbling in real estate, and with the housing market booming. Chaya told me I was in for a good day. Compared to the other girls, I was indeed lucky. I poured Carlton a cup of tea, and amid the fragrant steam, his next words made me shiver. He asked, "Do you want to serve many men? Or just one man?" I cursed him silently, wondering if I'd run into a pervert. But he looked sincere. "I know you make good money here serving tea, but I can offer you more. And you won't have to smile at every man who comes through this place. It's the ones I choose for you. After the job is done, I'll give you a 1% commission." So that's what he meant. I was relieved. But then again, wait. The men he chooses for me? What did that mean? It wasn't until he laid everything out for me that I fully understood. Carlton, much like my sister Chaya, was in the business of grooming and teaching us the rules of the game, then finding suitable patrons to market us to. The difference was, Carlton's interests were tied to his own business. He saw me as a sugar-coated bullet to handle the people and situations he couldn't manage himself. In addition to a fixed salary, he would also give me that 1% cut. As for anything extra I could get from the patron, as Carlton put it, "That's your skill. Even if you bring in mountains of gold, I won't interfere." That part appealed to me. Don't underestimate Carlton's 1%. The deals he handled were all tied to real estate, and 1% was plenty. Carlton got me a place to live. A modest 2-bedroom apartment. He didn't interfere with my personal life as long as, when work came up, I put it first. Before each task, he would leave a picture in my wardrobe along with a dossier detailing the target's preferences. At the same time, it'd find an extra 10,000 yuan in my account for expenses. There were no strict requirement, but one rule I had to follow: I needed to select a new set of lingerie based on the target's preferences. I applied all the techniques Chaya had taught me in the field. At first, I was nervous, but gradually, I found it thrilling. When Chaya first saw me, she said that with my looks and figure, working at even the highest-end clubs would still be beneath me. I remember one time when Carlton brought me to a dinner for a hospital expansion project. The hospital director, Naring, had a few greasy strands of hair combed over his bald head. When he got excited, one of those strands would bounce up and down. It was hard not to laugh. On the surface, he maintained a solemn demeanor, playing the role of the life-saving doctor with a compassionate heart. But his fat, shorthand was so innocent it kept wandering onto my thigh under the table. I recalled his preference sheet vividly: a tight-fitting qipao with a set of Victoria's Secret leopard print lingerie underneath. Though he couldn't see it, his eyes couldn't stop stealing glances at my chest. This man disgusted me. Though I wanted to do my job well, I had my limits. It's funny that it comes back to my first time. I'd hoped to give it to someone I liked, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't bring myself to like this director. Yet the die was cast. Everyone at the table could see his interest in me, and Carlton was pleased with my performance. He promptly pushed me toward the director, asking me to accompany him home, more like leading a lamb to the slaughter. The director's driver was quite tactful, blasting the music in the car. It was clear he had done this before, not asking any questions as he drove us straight to the biggest hotel in the city. In the back seat, the director dropped all pretense, burying his head in my chest, his fat hand snaking under my qipao like a thick fish, swimming all over my body. Panting, he said, "This outfit really does it for me. I love women like you, looking all pure and proper on the outside, but screaming like a wild thing once the clothes come off. I cursed him in my heart as a pervert but responded softly, my voice trembling as if I couldn't resist. Hearing my he got even more enthusiastic, tearing off the buttons of my qipao in no time, revealing the leopard print lingerie underneath. His eyes lit up like a wolf's, and even the heavy bags under them seemed to relax a little. Enough. Just as his fingers were about to touch my chest, I took control, flipping on top of him. He froze for a second before grinning with excitement. I leaned forward, holding my breath to avoid the stench from his mouth, while my fingers nimbly undid the buttons on his suit, casually brushing against his phone. It was 11 fitted p.m. Every night at 11, he would call his wife at home, and at 11:30, had ring his mistress. I clearly remembered that since his last call at 11:30, he hadn't made another. This meant that the last call he made was to his mistress. Amid the booming music, the director's passion was quickly ignited by my teasing. So much so that he didn't even notice my fingers doing more than just dancing on his body, just as I was smiling and undoing his belt. His phone buzzed to life, its flashing light glaring. I glanced at it and stopped what I was doing. With a slightly aggrieved tone, I said, "Your phone's ringing." He frowned and reached for it, then knocked on the driver's seat. "Turn off the music." Reluctantly, he had the driver drop him off at a nearby intersection and asked him to take me back, pointing at my torn qipao, telling me to buy a new one. I had narrowly avoided disaster a few times by now and couldn't help but feel a bit smug. I had completed the tasks perfectly, earned plenty of money, and still kept my first time intact. Until, that is, I met Cecil. As it turned out, I had underestimated some men's persistence. The ones they can't have often occupy their thoughts more than those they've already had. Though nothing significant had happened during my encounters with the director, this time he sent me an address directly, asking me to meet him there. Quick glance told me it was in one of the luxury villa districts in the city. Typically, men like him would rarely bring a woman to their private home, opting instead for hotels or resorts. This time, it seemed, I hesitated, but eventually put on the leopard print lingerie and went. The surroundings were indeed beautiful, with a large grove of fragrant white plum trees, adding a touch of elegance. His words about liking proper women, just like these plum blossoms, echoed in my mind. At the door, a butler came out to greet me. The moment I stepped inside, something felt off. The director was dressed neatly in a white shirt and black trousers, the room filled with warmth from the heating. Yet, sitting on the leather sofa, he exuded a faint chill. I flashed a smile and walked slowly toward him, but instead of sitting down, I crouched before him, gently holding his hand and resting my head on his knee. He shifted slightly and said in a low voice, "Do you know why I like you?" I didn't answer, only lazily responding, "You're like a little wildcat." He chuckled, his hand caressing my hair with more force. "When I was 20, I met a girl. She was the love of my life. She had the same crescent-shaped eyes when she smiled. So beautiful. And with a bit of attitude too. She was always obedient. Sometimes she would show her claws, but I loved her for its rambled on. But my mind was on the profile I'd memorized. He was a classic Phoenix man, a rural boy who had struggled through university, never even landing a hospital job after graduation. Instead working as a lowly employee in a pharmaceutical factory. It wasn't until he met his current wife, someone with significant connections, that his fortunes changed. Joined the hospital, and his career skyrocketed. The story was all too familiar. His wife, after suffering a miscarriage, never got pregnant again, and in the last couple of years, she had given up on having children altogether, allowing him to have mistresses who bore him a late-in-life son. I knew all of this well, so hearing him talk about someone outside of his wife and Mr. Skemman he had never forgot giving me a bad feeling. By the time he finished speaking, my legs were aching. He lifted me onto his lap, looking up at me with a sincere expression and said, "Cecilia, stay by my side. What do you think?" My heart sank, as I suspected. This was part of the plan. I belonged to Carlton, officially his assistant, tasked with overcoming obstacles like this, but I didn't belong to these men, nor did I want any long-term ties to them. The reason was simple: I didn't want to be a trophy or lose my freedom. I had my own goal, my own life. If I wanted to be a mistress, I would let Chaya take me straight into that world. This man was too invested in his fantasy. If I rejected him outright, it would certainly anger him. This was his turf, and I had no chance of resisting. Ma'am, I shyly nodded, pretending to misinterpret his words. I won't leave tonight. You'll stay. Unexpectedly, he didn't buy it. Reaching into his bag, he pulled out a document and slapped it against my chest. Here's the agreement. Take a look. My heart skipped a beat. Was he serious? An agreement? I glanced at it, pretending to read. It was all clearly laid out, heterodox rules in total, covering everything in detail. Not only did it specify how much he'd give me each month, but it also included how many times we'd sleep together. One clause stood out: no dating, no physical contact with other men, and no staying out overnight. I guess this was like a prison. This old guy really had it all figured out. Closing the document, I smiled at him and said, "I'll think about it." Think about it? He was taken aback, scrutinizing me before gritting his teeth. You think it's too little? Fine. They'll add more money. Feigning surprise and delight, I kissed his shiny bald head. You're so good to me, but it's my first time with something like this. I need to think it over and get advice from some of the other girls before I could finish. He suddenly pounced on me, gripping my waist tightly and kissing me aggressively. His mouth moved from my eyes to my neck, then down to my chest, leaving behind the taste of his saliva everywhere. Even through my qipao, I could feel his teeth biting my skin. I closed my eye, pretending to enjoy it, but inside, I was filled with dread. How do I get out of this one? His breathing was getting heavier. His hands had already slipped inside my qipao, and his fingers were moving toward my inner thigh. I was so nervous I could die. My legs clamped tightly together, but it only seemed to make him more excited. His rough breathing was in my ear, his hot breath on my neck, and he kept telling me to scream louder. I obeyed, raising my voice, but inside, I was panicking. Was I really going to get caught here? Tear. I felt a sudden chill below. Today I was wearing tie-side panties, and when he couldn't figure them out, he ripped them in his frustration, I guess, and he seemed delighted. Grabbing me even harder and growling in a low voice, he'd screaming, "Come on!" Oh, I was truly panicked, my movements becoming a little resistant. Wait a minute. Listen to me. I'm not feeling well. What's wrong with you? He thought I was playing hard to get, and his grip tightened, his fingers probing deeper. No, I was about to use all my strength to escape when I suddenly heard someone cough. Then, a cold chuckle followed by a voice. Director Cleveland, don't you think this kind of scene is a bit inappropriate right now? The director froze, his passion instantly fading like the tide. Seizing the moment, I stood up and quickly stepped to the side to fix my clothes. At the same time, a man walked into the room. He was backlit, and in my flush, I couldn't see his face clearly, but his shadow slowly stretched into the room, inch by inch, and I could feel my breath catch. I had never encountered someone with such a commanding presence before. Then I heard the director's somewhat embarrassed voice. Cecil. My fingers stiffened as I buttoned my dress. It was because of the title boss. Plenty of people were called that nowadays. It's because of the director's attitude. I had known him for a long time, yet I had never seen him show such respect to anyone. And the man in front of him didn't even bother to respond. With just one title and that deferential tone, the difference in status was clear. I barely managed to fix my clothes. The panties were ruined, but thankfully my qipao was torn. It felt a bit cold, but at least nothing was exposed. The director pointed upstairs, probably intending for me to wait there, and I was about to breathe a sigh of relief when the man across from us let out a mocking laugh. Director Cleveland, I came to discuss business. What's the meaning of having a woman here? The director wrung his hands nervously. Don't worry. See? The man didn't even let him finish. He turned his head slightly, his eyes landing on me. His words, cold as ice, hit me like stones. Dazed, yet secretly pleased, I grabbed my bag and hurried out without waiting for the director's permission. The moment I stepped out of the villa, it felt like I had been reborn. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out my phone and called Carlton. An hour later, I was sitting across from Carlton, sipping a steaming cup of herbal tea. It was only then that I felt like I had come back to life. Carlton, on the other hand, sat in silence, his brows furrowed deeply. Help me get out of this. He didn't respond immediately. After a long drag on his cigarette, he exhaled slowly and muttered, "It's complicated." This was the first time I had seen him like this, and it sent a chill through me. What's the complication? Haven't the contracts for the project been signed? It's a done deal, isn't it? Carlton raised his eyes to look at me, his brows furrowing even tighter. Who are you talking about? Who else? Director Cleveland, I replied. He wanted me to sign an agreement today to become his mistress. I'm not doing that. Carlton slowly pulled out another cigarette, tapping it against the ashtray before lighting it. Do you not like him as a person? Or do you just not want to be a mistress? Both? I replied without hesitation. When Chaya introduced me to you, she surely mentioned that if I wanted to be a mistress, I would have done it long ago. I wouldn't have waited until I met you. Carlton stayed silent, squinting as he took another long drag from his cigarette, blowing the smoke out slowly. Cecilia, this time, there's no room for negotiation. I froze. What? That was part of the deal. We met. Waved his hand. It's not about me, or even about the director. He looked up at me, a resigned helplessness in his eyes. It's about Cecil. I let out a scoffing laugh. The VP? Even the CEO wouldn't have said Cecil. His voice was low but firm. Fate can be so absurd sometimes. When you want to go east, it pushes you west, and there's nothing you can do to resist. I left the tea house like a ghost, clutching my bag tightly. I decided I needed some retail therapy to cope with my frustration. I didn't have many friends, and everyone was busy. Spending money had become my way of finding comfort. But maybe it just was my day. I hadn't walked far past a boutique when I saw two people standing there, a man and a woman. The man was my ex, Daniel. The woman was his little mistress. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd seen him. It had been so long that I thought I had forgotten his face. But the moment I saw him, my heart skipped a beat, especially when I saw that familiar smile on his face. The same one that used to make people swoon, looking as harmless as ever. It made my blood boil. Why was he the one who died? When I was with Daniel, it was the happiest, most innocent time of my life. I had just gotten into college, and Daniel was so good to me, treating me like a treasure. It was as if he'd do anything for me, promising me the moon and stars. His family background was average, but he was extremely hardworking. My father really liked him too, saying he was the best among this batch of graduate students. With my father's permission, the two of us became almost like a young married couple, except for not crossing the final line. We did everything else. He wasn't happy about this at the time and would often say things like I didn't love him enough to scare me. Honestly, I had hesitated, but in the end, I held my ground. Looking back now, I'm really thankful for my stubbornness back then. Daniel's little girlfriend had long hair, big eyes, and a pointed chin, your typical influencer face. He paid for the bill, and she kissed him excitedly. They were flaunting their love even on the street. As they turned to leave, it was too late for me to avoid them. I decided to face them head on. After all, I was the one who had done anything wrong back then. Daniel clearly froze when he saw me. He squinted slightly, looking a bit nervous. He always squinted when he was nervous. His little girlfriend noticed his reaction and pouted in a cute voice. What's wrong, honey? He snapped out of it, kissed her on the forehead, and gently stroked her hair, saying, You go wait in the car. He'll be right there. The girl took her bag, satisfied, and walked out with a smug look, not forgetting to give me a sideways glance and an eye roll on her way out. Daniel walked up to me. Cecilia, when did you come back? These past few years. I smiled, casually flicking my hair, interrupting him. I had to come back. My dad died, and all the inheritance went to you. I had no way to survive abroad, so I had no choice. I guess Daniel's skin has thickened over the years, as his eyes filled with pain, and he said with deep sorrow, Cecilia, I thought about sending you money, but the professor's will didn't take effect right away. There was a buffer period. I really had no choice then. Daniel. I suddenly felt irritated. Like talking to him was an insult to myself. Let's not talk about the past. Let's talk about now. Do you have money now? He was stunned for a moment but then nodded repeatedly, looking around confidently. Pick whichever one you like. I'll buy it for you. I let out a short laugh. All right. How about that whole row? The confident smile on Daniel's face froze instantly and shattered. This was a luxury store. There were more than 20 bags in that row, at least 300. Zero for the whole set. What's wrong? Can't bear it? Daniel swallowed hard and forced a weak smile. Cecilia, stop messing around. He waved to a nearby sales assistant and said grandly, pack up your most expensive bag. I sneered at his act, but to my surprise, the sales assistant didn't move an inch. Didn't you hear what I said? Daniel was losing face and pushed again. The sales, with a blank expression, replied, I'm sorry. So, but you can't afford the most expensive one here. Daniel's smile vanished instantly, replaced by anger. Are you out of your mind? How expensive could it possibly be? Just give me a price. He pulled out a black card from his wallet as he spoke. Here, take it. The sales assistant didn't even glance at the card and calmly said, there's no need to tell you. You can't afford it. I couldn't help but find the situation amusing. This was getting interesting. Daniel's eyebrows furrowed into a tight knot. His face turned pale with anger. And he awkwardly stood there holding out the black card that no one was taking. He was mortified. I'm going to file a complaint. What's your name? Get your manager out here. Daniel was fuming. A mocking voice sounded. Who's being all high and mighty here? I didn't even need to see the person to know who it was. Elaine strutted over in her 12-centimeter heel, swaying her hips as she walked up to Daniel. She gave him a once-over, her smile plastered on her face. Daniel, the big shop manager. Looks like you're really rolling in dough now. Daniel squinted at Elaine, then glanced at the middle-aged man standing beside her, pocketed his black card, and said, so it's Miss Elaine. Quite a rare sight. What? Do you own this store now? Decided to clean up your act? His words were venomous. Elaine hated being called Miss more than anything, and Daniel hit her right where it hurt. Elaine examined her freshly manicured nails. You don't need to worry about that. You should be more concerned about your kidney. I heard from that by woman that she dumped you because you couldn't perform. As she spoke, her eyes deliberately drifted down to Daniel's crotch. Exposed, Daniel gritted his teeth, his face turning purple like an eggplant, and he was one step away from exploding on the spot. All right, Elaine. Well, let's see how long you can keep up this arrogance. He stormed off in a rage, but not before giving me one last look filled with emotion. I glanced around the store, holding my hand to my chest. Elaine, you just cost me a bed. Elaine waved her hand generously. Pick anything you like from the store. It's all on me. After all, this is my man's store. I glanced at the man behind her, giving him a polite smile. But deep down, I couldn't help but feel a bit worried. Elaine was a college classmate of mine and a witness to my relationship with Daniel. She came from a small mountain village in the southwest, where her parents had the ability to have children, but not to raise them properly. They never treated her as their own, and they almost didn't let her finish elementary school. But Elaine gritted her teeth, endured constant beating, and managed to graduate high school. She packed her bags and fled to Owo City. She had told me about the hardships she endured growing up, which sounded like fairy tales to me since I grew up in luxury. However, she never told me how she got into college or where she got the money from. I was smart enough never to ask. After all, who doesn't have their own secret? Up until my life fell apart, we had a pretty good relationship, but then I cut off all contact with everyone. When I was forced to return to the country and finish dealing with everything, the first person I reached out to was Elaine. She didn't ask anything and took care of me for a month, spending money like water. Then I told her, help me find a job that makes quick money. The next day, Elaine introduced me to Sister Chaya. At that time, Elaine's sponsor owned a luxury goods store, representing 2 international brands. The business was doing well, and he was generous with his spending. Elaine had been with him for over a year, but they had broken up about 6 months ago. I wasn't sure why they were back together today, and I was a bit worried for her. We were walking through a row of stores of video, and the like while the man followed behind us. Elaine walked from one store to another, casually pinching and inspecting the items with her 2 fingers. Her face was either expressionless or had a disdainful smile. "Just these few design?" she asked lazily. The sales associate smiled awkwardly, unable to respond. I knew Elaine was doing it on purpose, and this was exactly the effect she wanted. Finally, she picked up a pair of high heels and said inferently, "Size 36. Wrap them up." As soon as she spoke, the man behind her quickly paid the bill. After about 2 hours of shopping, we found a Starbucks to sit down in. The man loaded her bags into the car before reluctantly leaving. Looking back at her every few steps, I took a bite of my black forest cake. Squinting with satisfaction, Elaine smirked and said, "You're like a cat. Just a little bit of stuff makes you happy?" When she mentioned cats, I immediately thought of what the director had said and nearly choked. Elaine was doing on purpose, trying to ruin my appetite. I wiped my hands and asked, "What's going on with you? Why are you back with him? Aren't you afraid the other one will find out?" I hadn't met her new sponsor, but Sister Chaya had told me he was a very powerful man who kept a tight leash on her. Elaine lowered her eyes, stirring her coffee as she asked softly, "Cecilia, do you know what day it is today?" I froze, quickly running through important dates in my mind, and my heart skipped a beat, but I kept my composure and calmly pulled a beauty card from my bag, pushing it in front of her. "Of course I remembered. I was going to surprise you, but you brought it up first. Today was the 7th day of the 12th lunar month, Elaine's birthday according to the lunar calendar. Back in her hometown, birthdays were always celebrated by the lunar calendar." Saying it, "Thanks," she took a sip of coffee, foam clinging to her lips, her eyes moist with unhid tears. "For more than 20 years, I've never lived my life right, not even my birthday. Today is his wedding anniversary with his wife, so of course, he has to go home." I took a deep breath, not saying a word. Elaine was actually someone with a strong sense of purpose and determination. If she weren't, she wouldn't have clawed her way out of her small village to where she was today. Sister Chaya once said that this determination could either make Elaine or break her. "He's going home to his wife, and I'm supposed to celebrate my birthday alone? Who the hell only gets one birthday a year?" Elaine downed her coffee like it was alcohol. "There are plenty of men chasing after me. All I need to do is beckon, and they'll come throwing money at me." After leaving Starbucks, we wandered through a few more stores. The sky was overcast, and it looked like it was going to snow. Elaine rubbed her stomach and invited me to fancy meal. By fancy, she meant hot pot. She said ever since she'd been with her current sponsor, she hadn't been allowed to eat hot pot because he disliked the smell. When they were together, it was either vegetarian meals or Western cuisine. We got a private room and Elaine ordered a whole table full of dishes. The waiter hesitated and asked how many people there were. Elaine slammed her hand on the table and said, "I've got money, if I want to order and throw it away." "So what?" The waiter didn't dare say anything more, bringing in the dishes one after another like a flowing stream. In the end, they even brought in a case of beer and 2 bottles of wine. At times like this, there's no point in trying to stop her. All you can do is sit with her. Fortunately, she knew I couldn't hold my liquor and didn't force me to drink. She drank glass after glass herself, and within an hour, she was already drunk. The room was filled with steam, and Elaine's face was flushed red as she mumbled incoherently. Watching her, I started to feel uneasy. Could she have caught feelings? Sister Chaya's warnings suddenly echoed in my mind, and I shivered involuntarily. Sister Chaya always told us that in this line of work, never let your heart get involved, and never fall in love. I thought that advice was spot on. It was like I had much heart or feelings left to give. Anyway, the only thing keeping me in Los Angeles was a single goal, and it had nothing to do with love. After paying the bill, I looked at the drunken Elaine, now slumped like a pile of mud, and felt a bit lost. Just then, A waiter passed by, and I quickly called him over with a smile, asking if he could help. The waiter, probably in his early 20s, blushed immediately. I hadn't expected anyone to be so innocent these days. I finally managed to get Elaine into the car, slipping the waiter 100 yuan as a tip. He refused, waving his hands frantically before running off. I smiled, remembering how Daniel used to be that innocent back when I had just started university. The thought barely crossed my mind before I gave myself a mental slap. Driving Elaine's car halfway home, it started to snow heavily. I only knew the general area where she lived but wasn't familiar with the exact location. It weren't for the fact that her sponsor was coming to see her early tomorrow morning. I would have taken her to my place instead. I carefully followed the GPS in her car, driving slowly as the snow piled up on the road. I was the best driver, and the car felt like it was skidding. By the time I finally pulled up to Elaine's house, I was drenched in sweat. It was nearly midnight. She lived in a standalone small building, with the iron gate tightly closed. I hadn't even gotten out to knock when the door opened from the inside, and someone waved at me. I stepped on the gas and drove in, not even bothering to park properly. I got out of the car and dragged Elaine out, calling her name as I walked inside. The one who opened the door was a man in his 50s, skinny, who just stood aside watching, not offering a hand. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I happened to look up and suddenly saw a man standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. With the glass and the heavy snowfall between us, I couldn't make out his face. He stood there, arms crossed, as still as a statue. A snowflake slipped down my collar, and I shivered. Elaine almost slipped off my shoulder. For some reason, the man's gaze gave me a bad feeling. As soon as I got inside, the heat hit me. I helped Elaine to the sofa, and she immediately sank into it, mumbling something but not waking up. My eyes flicked over to the coffee table and saw a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses liquor. Someone had been drinking here, but that wasn't my concern. I turned to leave, and the man who had been standing by the window somehow moved behind me. He looked about 40, with a face so gloomy it was scary. He asked if Elaine had been drinking with me. I nodded and said yes. He glanced at Elaine, his eyes sharp like knives, and let out a cold snort, saying, I rushed back to celebrate her birthday. I moved my lips but didn't defend Elaine. Relationships like this are best left to be explained by the people involved. Otherwise, an outsider saying too much might stir up more trouble. Just as I was about to leave, Elaine's phone buzzed with a message. Almost instinctively, I realized it wasn't an ordinary text. Without thinking, I rushed over and grabbed her phone. Sure enough, the screen showed half a message, and just that half was enough to ruin her. It was from the man she had been with earlier today. I quickly unlocked the phone, didn't open the message, and deleted it straight away. Give me an explanation, the man demanded, his eyes boring into me like nails. My heart pounded, and I forced a smile, clutching the phone tightly. Sorry. My phone's ringtone is the same as hers. I got confused. His lips were tightly pressed together, like he was ready to bite my head off with his next words. Get out. I let out a breath, placed the phone back, and glanced at Elaine, still, before walking quickly to the door. The snow had gotten heavier, and the wind more fierce, slicing across my face like knives. I pulled my coat tighter, but I was still shivering from the cold. I cursed both the weather and the man inside as I walked. No one offered to give me a ride, even though the place was already remote, and with the current weather, getting a taxi would be impossible. I thought I might freeze to death here. Just as I was muttering curses under my breath, the door suddenly opened behind me, and the man called out to me. I turned around, trembling. He came toward me, holding an umbrella, and asked me a strange question. Miss Cecilia, have you ever been to San Diego? I was startled, then shivered even more, shaking my head, not wanting to face this man any longer. I turned to walk away. He followed me a couple of steps, holding an umbrella over my head, making me feel slightly suffocated. He was about to say something when suddenly, a car by the side of the road flashed its headlights with sharp beams cutting through the night like knives. The man took 2 steps back, and a man got out of the car, also holding an umbrella. He walked quickly to me. "Miss Cecilia, please get in the car." I couldn't see who was inside, and the unknown made me uneasy. But what made me even more uneasy was the mention of San Diego by the man behind me. I didn't understand why his attitude had suddenly changed, how he knew my surname was Chu. These questions filled me with panic. Without much hesitation, I walked toward the black car. The door opened, and I saw the man sitting in the back seat. He was wearing a light gray suit. His eyes half closed. In the dim light, I could see his strong, chiseled side profile, his high nose bridge, and thin lips. He remained still, but his presence was enough to make me hold my breath. That overwhelming sense of familiarity hit me like a tidal wave, and I instantly knew who he was. Realizing it was him, I found myself caught in an awkward position, not knowing whether to go in or stay out. Cecil suddenly opened his eyes and glanced at me. From his angle, he could clearly see the fullness of my chest. I saw fire quickly ignite in his eyes, full of naked desire. He was very handsome, but there was also a deep coldness in his bone. Before I could sit properly, he pulled me into his arms. Scared of me? I held my breath and carefully replied that Cecil's reputation was well known, and everyone was afraid of him. He let out a low chuckle, his fingers slowly sliding over my nipple. "Only bad people, those with guilty consciences, are afraid of me. I'm not a good woman either." He laughed even more, a light wrinkle forming at the corner of his eye, and the desire in his eyes deepened. His warm breath brushed against my face, and, at the same time, the driver silently raised the partition between the front and back seat. Just then, Cecil leaned in to bite me. He really bit me. My teeth ground against my lips, a sensation that was both painful and ticklish, making my whole body stiffen. I stared at him wide-eyed, not knowing what to do. I was panicking. Is he really going to do it here? As soon as that thought crossed my mind, his hand had already slipped under my cheongsam, his fingers hooking onto the edge of my panty. He laughed wickedly. "So you're wearing panties now?" My face instantly burned red. Of course, I was wearing them. Since leaving the dean's place, there was no way I'd stay naked the whole time. His voice kept ringing in my ears, saying, "No need for underwear now." Cecil had a strong possessiveness, but his desire was even stronger. I almost suspected he had been celibate for too long. In this area, he was like a beast, yet his movements were gentle, as if he cared about how I felt. That surprised me. Usually, sponsors don't treat their kept women like people. At most, they see them as tools they've paid for to satisfy their desires. Once they've spent money, they're the boss, the king. Who cares about your feeling? As long as they're satisfied, that's all that matters. Nimble fingers swiftly unbuttoned my shirt, stripping me bare. The car was filled with our breaths and that particular scent. I never thought my first time would be in a car. Snow was swirling outside, and while it was freezing, the car's heater was on high. We were both sweating, and I could feel part of him burning against me, pressing hard against that spot. I trembled all over. Although I had seen many men and their so-called pride, this was a situation I had never encountered before. "Nervous?" he asked softly. I nodded, unable to speak. "Don't worry. I'm 100 times better than that you guy." There was a teasing tone in his voice. I bit my lip, feeling a sense of humiliation. To my surprise, he didn't go any further. Shortly after, the car stopped, and he moved off me. I realized then that he had only undone a few buttons on my shirt, and all my other clothes were still intact. This man, I gritted my teeth, feeling so embarrassed I wanted to crawl under the seat. He seemed to chuckle, pulling his coat around me before lifting me out of the car. The world seemed to spin. I saw snowflakes swirling above and around me, but my body was nestled in a warm embrace. Suddenly, I remembered what Elaine once said: when you've drifted for long enough, the moment you find an embrace, you'll desperately crave its warmth. I lowered my eyes, a different person's image flashing in my mind. My warmth had long ceased to exist. The house was beige, the decor minimal, anything but black, white, and gray. It was high-end, but lacked a personal touch. Before I could take a good look, Cecil carried me to the second floor, and I was thrown onto the bed, feeling a bit dizzy. He switched on the light, and the dazzling crystal chandelier overhead blinded me. Suddenly, I felt a chill. I was completely exposed in front of him. Out of all the men I've ever seen, Cecil was undoubtedly the most handsome, especially in this moment. With his face full of desire, he looked even more captivating. His dark eyebrows, smoldering eyes, and the fire burning in them that was ignited by me made me feel that losing my first time to a man like him was a bad deal. I bit my lip, and the taste of blood filled my mouth. It seemed that action stirred something in him. He suddenly pounced on me, pressing heavily against my body. One hand gripped my breast while the other slid under my weight, forcing my back to arch. His long legs parted mine, and before I could even gasp, his lips landed on my stomach. It felt as though something exploded inside me, heating me up from the inside. Every pore seemed to be screaming, and I shifted from nervous to pleasure, until I felt him press something hot against me. Do you want it? His voice was low and husky, with a tantalizing edge. I bit my lip and nodded helplessly. He chuckled softly, then without hesitation, thrust forward, as though piercing right through me. The pain was indescribable, and I couldn't help but cry out. Gripping his shoulders tightly, I felt him stop, and when I opened my eye, I saw a flicker of surprise in his gaze. Is this your first time? He asked. I hissed in pain, cold sweat dripping from my forehead. But I didn't answer. He gently brushed the hair off my forehead, revealing my entire face. So stubborn, he murmured. After a few seconds of pause, he began to move again, this time much slower. His arms held me tighter. I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination, but I almost felt cherished. But I couldn't help but sneer inwardly. Cecilia, stop dreaming. No man will ever cherish you again in this life. I was wrong. Ceclis had an incredibly strong desire, and his body was equally powerful. He took me 3 times in one night, my first experience, and I met someone like him, almost breaking me apart. By the end of it, I couldn't even remember how I survived. When I woke up the next morning, my whole body felt like it had been soaked in vinegar overnight. Every bone sore beyond words. I looked around. There was no one. He was gone. On the bedside table was a paper bag with a women's clothing brand logo on it. Was this for me? I quietly peeked inside. There was a complete set of clothes, even underwear. That made sense. She had carried me in naked last night. Just then, there was a knock on the door. I clutched the blanket and responded. Someone outside asked if I was awake and said the clothes on the bedside were for me. One stretch, I could go downstairs for breakfast. I hurried to get dressed, surprised at how accurately Cecil had guessed my size. He must have gained plenty of experience from other women to get it so right. Breakfast was sumptuous. I had no appetite. Cecil didn't discuss anything with me, nor did he leave any instructions when he left. So now, I guess I'm not really one of his kept women, right? Maybe I was just someone he slept with for a night. The clothes were nice. And with the coat in the bag on the sofa, the whole outfit must have cost at least 50,000. With that in mind, I didn't feel too bad. After all, today is the Laba Festival. Let's just say this is a reward I gave myself. Having made up my mind, after breakfast, I headed out. The housekeeper asked, "Are you going out? It's still snowing outside." I nodded but didn't answer her. Obviously, if not now, when else would I leave? As soon as I stepped outside, I realized I was completely lost. Had no idea which direction to go. But the snowy scenery was beautiful, full of the luxurious, high-class vibe that money can buy. After a long time, I finally flagged down a cab. The driver kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror, as if he wanted to start a conversation but didn't quite dare. Suddenly, my phone rang. I pulled it out and saw it was Chaya calling. She normally would let contact me unless something urgent happened, especially not on such a cold mornings. Not a morning person. I quickly answered, and Chaya's voice was unusually low, instantly making me tense. She asked where I was and who I was with. I honestly replied that I wasn't familiar with the area, that I was in a cab heading into the city. There was a brief silence before she said, "Elaine is dead." I froze. Phone slipped from my hand. my heart racing as if it would leap out of my chest. My face must have looked awful because the driver, who had been watching me, softly asked if I was okay. I fumbled to pick up the phone, gripping it tightly as if it weighed 1,000 pounds, making it hard to breathe. I asked how Elaine had died, telling her that we had been together just yesterday, and she was fine when I dropped her off last night. It sounded like Chaya with. I heard her exhale before she said, she was to Carlton. Elaine's death shocked me. I didn't have many close friends, and Elaine was one of the few I could confide in. I asked Chaya where she was, and she gave me an address. I immediately told the driver to take me there. The closer we got, the more anxious I became. The road we were on was the same one I'd driven down last night. When we arrived at the small building, Chaya was leaning against her red BMW, smoking. She wore a black suit and a hat, with smoke curling from her cigarette, looking like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Chaya is a legendary figure in our line of work. While I was still in college, she was already making waves in the industry, as some girls would say. She spent just one night to earn herself a villa by the river, though the price she paid was high, but that's not something just anyone could achieve, no matter how willing they were to pay. When Chaya saw me, she tilted her chin in acknowledgement. I hurried over, my legs shaking, and my voice trembling as it finally escaped my mouth. Elaine, where is she? Chaya didn't say anything. She took a long drag from her cigarette and, after slowly exhaling, said, "Don't look." "What?" I asked, though deep down, I already knew the answer. Cold sweat broke out on my back. Chaya crushed her cigarette under her foot, looking down as she said, "It's too tragic, I guess." Unable to describe the feeling in my chest, it was as if something had been torn out of me, leaving a gaping hole that nothing could fill. I wanted to cry, to prove that my relationship with Elaine had been good, but I couldn't shed a single tear. All I could do was panic, mindlessly repeating, "How could this happen? She was fine yesterday. Yesterday was her birthday. Yesterday, we went shopping together, and she even bought a new pair of shoes. Size 36. Yesterday we had a big meal." Her favorite hop toddy kept babbling until Chaya finally snapped, telling me to shut up, but I couldn't stop. Slap! In the middle of my incoherent rambling, Chaya slapped me hard across the face, and the diamonds on her ring flashed in my eye. "Get a grip. Do you think saying all that helps? Who are you trying to disgust? I called you here to learn a lesson from her. Understand?" I felt like a puppet as Chaya dragged me into her car, leaning against the window. I stared at the snowy scenery, remembering the times I spent with Elaine. The first time we met, she had said, "My name's Elaine. I'm from a mountain village, but I'm never going back there." When I left for abroad, I hadn't told her or anyone else where I was going. When I came back, she didn't ask any questions. She just put her arm around my shoulders and took me home. She was the one who found me a stylist, and after making me look perfect, it seemed like she was always doing something for me, but I'd never done anything for her. I hadn't even been there to see her one last time. I kept wondering if I hadn't taken her home last night, would this have happened? But there are no ifs. Chaya drove us to a busy part of the city and stopped in front of a Starbucks. She dragged me inside, ordered 2 coffees and a few pieces of cake, and pushed them in front of me. Swallow your emotions, and then think carefully about how to move on. I ate numbly, thinking about how I'd come to Starbucks with Elaine just yesterday. She had been upset because that man wouldn't spend her birthday with her. As I thought about it, I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. I cried silently for a long time. Chaya handed me a tissue, then bluntly asked, "What's going on between you and Cecil?" "Sister Chaya, at a time like this, I really wasn't in the mood to talk about it. At a time like this, you must talk," Chaya said firmly. "Don't think you're the only one grieving. I may seem cold, but I raised Elaine myself, longer than you've known her. I warned her not to play with fire, but she didn't let, and now she's paid the price. I can't watch you go down the same path." Then let out a short laugh, lighting another cigarette. "People say that whores are heartless, but that's only because the people who say it are heartless. Why should we care about them? Cecilia, no matter how I treat others. I've always cared about you and Elaine. I silently nodded. Sister Chaya was strong. She had taught me many things. Without her guidance, I wouldn't have gotten into this line of work so quickly. In our industry, women come and go, all trying to rise to the top. But most spend years working as escorts, only to see their best years pass without ever living the kind of life I have now. Cecil is a great opportunity for you. Sister Chaya said serious. Think about it. Who are the others spending their time with? Old and ugly men. If it weren't for the little bit of power and money they hold, who besides their own mothers would want to be with them? But Cecil is different. She continued. He's young, handsome, and there are countless women who'd kill for this chance. And you're pushing him away? Plus, the power he holds. It's not something most people can even dream of. In truth, I didn't know exactly how much money or power Cecil had. I never asked Carlton much, but from his expression alone, I could tell that Cecil was no ordinary person. His wealth was far beyond Carlton. I knew that look on Carlton's face all too well. Just then, Sister Chaya's phone rang. She glanced at it, then pressed the mute button and turned back to me. As for Elaine, don't think about her anymore. She brought that on herself. I called you here to warn you didn't make the same low-level mistake she did. Our line of work may be dirty, but it comes with strict rule. All right, I'll leave you to think it over. After Sister Chaya left, I sat there alone, feeling as if a huge weight had settled on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Snow had started falling again outside. People hurried by, wrapped tightly in their coats, struggling through the cold. I sat in a warm, heated room, dressed in a designer coat with perfect makeup. I should be the person they envy. But they didn't know that I had just experienced the death of a sister and now faced a difficult decision. I sat there until almost noon. Having ordered 3 refills of my drink, I decided to order one more, because I realized that a man had been watching me for an hour. I was waiting for him to make a move. Finally, through the steam of freshly brewed coffee, he picked up his coat and walked over. I glanced at him. New season Armani coat. Price tag over 30,000. Excuse me, may I buy you a cup of coffee? He asked. I smiled slightly and looked up, meeting his eyes. His smile was genuine, but to me, it was deeply ironic. As expected, he didn't remember me. The man handed me a rolled-up piece of paper, smiling as he told me to open it. I didn't need to open it to guess what it was. Pretending to be puzzled, I unrolled it, and sure enough, it was a portrait of me, looking out of the window as I had been earlier. Thank you, I said, just as he reached out to hold the other end of the drawing. I can't give this to you. It's mine. I was taken aback but slowly gave him a smile, not letting go. Watching his stunned expression, I suppressed my disgust and asked softly, the portrait is of me. How is it yours? He slowly exhaled, his Adam's apple bobbing up and down. I drew it, so it's mine. All right then, I said, letting go decisively without any further hesitation. Picking up my phone from the table and preparing to leave, I silently counted to 3 in my mind. And sure enough, before I reached 3, he grabbed my arm. How about this, give me your number, and he'll have the drawing framed and deliver it to you later. It would be too rude to give it to you like this. I pretended to hesitate for a moment, and he quickly handed me a pen, not waiting for me to agree before pushing it into my hand. Just as I was about to look for paper, he extended his hand. Palm open. Write it here. Suppressing the nausea rising again, I cursed inwardly. Click. But then scribbled my phone number on his palm. His fingers were long, his palm dry and warm. His hands were indeed attractive. After all, they had mesmerized countless girls back when he held a paintbrush, including Elaine. Back then, I had been forced to leave home and flee Los Angeles, barely scraping by abroad, almost dying out there. And he was part of the reason. Coming back this time, one of my goals was to clear up what had happened all those years ago. But I hadn't expected to run into him so soon, and right after Elaine's death. No less. Since he had appeared in front of me, I wouldn't be polite. He read the number I had written on his palm, then pulled a business card from his pocket. It was a pale beige card with 3 black cursive characters on it. David. I curved my lips into a smile, lowering my eyes to hide the contempt in them. Back then, this name had been all the rage at the art academy. Elaine had dragged me across half the city from our school to see him, gushing about how he was straight out of a Kwangya romance novel, even down to his name. At that time, Elaine was still a girl who truly believed in love. She had grown up deprived of affection and desperately craved someone to love her. Her eyes were dripping with honey whenever she mentioned David, and she swore she would study hard to get into the top hospital and have a stable job, so she could be worthy of him. But reality is always cruel. Life slapped Elaine in the face. Whether in a novel or in real life, David was nothing but a scumbag. David's wife had stormed into their tiny rented apartment with a group of women while Elaine was studying for an exam. Without a word, they pinned her down and beat her senseless, tearing her study materials to shreds and nearly setting the place on fire, if the landlord hadn't arrived and threatened to call the police. Of course, the landlord was too kind either terrified her of more trouble. He immediately told Elaine she had to move out. Elaine's clothes were torn into strips, her body covered in wounds, and she walked barefoot down the street, looking like a corpse that had risen from the dead. It was from that moment that Elaine, after surviving, seemed like a completely different person. As for David, he disappeared after that, like a fleeting rainstorm that evaporated as soon as the sun came out. Elaine never mentioned him again. As for what happened later, I closed my eyes slightly and turned the business card over, pretending to be surprised. You're a professor at the Academy of Fine Arts? My apologies for not recognizing that. Professor? It's just a title, he said with a charming smile. His white shirt collar gleamed so brightly. He really did look like a well-dressed beast. Leaving the Starbucks, I realized I was trembling. I thought I had long forgotten about those past events. But in reality, they were thorns buried deep in my heart, fused with flesh and blood, and the slightest touch made them bleed. Back at the apartment, I filled the bathtub with hot water, and soak myself in it. The heat gradually eased my stiffness, but I was still slightly shivering. Sister Chaya had said that Elaine died terribly. What exactly did that mean? She must have been in great pain. Thinking about her benefactor, the rage made my teeth clench. Why do people like them get to control life and death so easily? I cried my heart out again, changed into my nightgown, and when I walked out, I saw Carlton sitting on the couch. When did you get here? I asked in a hoarse voice. He didn't speak but pointed to the ashtray filled with 6 cigarettes, but I didn't say anything either. And instead, I opened half a window, letting in a gust of cold wind. About Cecil. After a long pause, he finally spoke. I squinted my eyes and replied, "Can we not talk about now?" He frowned, but before he could say anything, my phone on the coffee table suddenly rang. It was an unknown number. I answered, and just after I said hello, I heard a soft chuckle. "You're so mischievous," said David on the other end. "Oh, it's Professor David. I'd given him the wrong number," deliberately changing the last digit, but I had expected he would still call. I just didn't think it would be so soon. I made several calls. None of them were you, but persistence paid off, and I finally got through. David's tone was light, and I could tell he was in a good mood. "I've made up my mind. I want you to be my model. The pay is good. Come to my studio tomorrow." This man always assumes his charm is irresistible. That whatever he says, a woman will immediately agree and run eagerly to him. He must have been spoiled by his female student. I raised my eyebrows in a cold smile, though he couldn't see my mocking expression. "Tomorrow won't work. I've got plans. How about we reschedule? I've got another call coming in. I'll get back to you later." Without waiting for his reply, I hung up the phone. I believed that with a man like him, you had to keep him hanging. The more elusive you are, the more intrigued he gets. Carlton, watching me finish the call, immediately asked, "Who was that?" "Cecilia." "You're smart. I don't need to spell things out. Right now, any man put him aside. He'll just ask you, 'What's going on between you and Cecil?'" I shook my head and said, "Nothing much. We spent one night together. That's all." I didn't ask him for money. We owe each other nothing. Carlton frowned at me like I was an idiot. "Are you kidding me?" He took a harsh drag from his cigarette. You're playing dumb with me. Huh? Do you even know who Cecil is? Owe each other nothing. That's a golden opportunity people dream of. And you, seeing how angry he was, I poured him a glass of water and casually asked, what's his deal? Is he richer than you? Why are you so afraid of him? Carlton shot me a look like he wanted to strangle me, and then finally told me who Cecil really was. I took a slow, deep breath. Cecil's identity both surprised and excited me, while also planting a bold idea in my mind, one I had never considered before. The title chief could have another meaning, and it turns out my understanding had been too shallow. Carlton explained that Cecil was some big CEO of a corporate group. He was actually the head of the Provincial Public Security Bureau. He had a quirk: she didn't like being addressed by titles like deputy chief. So everyone just called him Cecil, which meant the boss. My eyes widened as nervous excitement made my palms sweat. For someone like me, this was truly a rare opportunity, a connection that would be nearly impossible to find. Carlton and Sister Chaya shared the same opinion. In our line of work, it's not exactly respectable. I was slightly better off, though, since I hadn't worked in nightclubs before. Carlton had recruited me from a tea house, which sounded a bit cleaner than working in nightlife. If I had a dark past and could latch onto Cecil, it would be like securing an untouchable safety card. But for me, there was an even greater advantage. I tried to recall if Cecil had said anything significant last night, but apart from asking if it was my first time, all he did was push me to my limit. He hadn't said anything else or asked me to stay. So now, what does this mean? Carlton scolded me for quite some time, and after finally sending him away, I stood by the window, thinking things over. I eventually decided to send Cecil a text. Are you coming back for dinner tonight? This question carried several layers of meaning, the most important being that I hadn't left. He was still in the house, waiting for him. I waited anxiously for a long time, but he never replied. Just then, Sister Chaya called again, saying there was a gathering, and she wanted me to come. I wasn't really in the mood, but I wanted to update her on my current situation and seek her advice. Besides, she mentioned someone was coming today, and as soon as I heard the name, I agreed without hesitation. My wardrobe was filled with qipaos. I had nothing else. Sister Chaya said my figure would be wasted if I didn't wear qipao. Carlton also remarked that nowadays, being pretty washed and all it mattered more was having charm, which was intriguing and captivating. I chose a black satin qipao with silver trim. It was understated yet wouldn't make me look insignificant, just right for an all-female gathering. In this industry, people are used to seeing money and fine things. It's all about securing a man and the affection that comes from him. There's jealousy and envy among women. They mock those who are doing better, but it's essential not to underestimate a woman's jealousy. It can drive people to madness, causing them to desire the unattainable. They either destroy others or find themselves lost without knowing how they ended up that way. But I wasn't there to be the center of attention, nor did I want to be stepped on. Sister Chaya had chosen a place in a small courtyard she had acquired a few years back. It was a bit remote at the time, but her benefactor had left it unused, and when they broke up, he gave it to her as a parting gift. She didn't mind, and the property was transferred to her name. In just a few years, the area around the courtyard had been rapidly developed, becoming a sought-after location. The courtyard itself had been beautifully maintained. Regardless of whether it would be torn down or not, its value had increased significantly. Sister Chaya had an innate eye for these things, both for men and for investments. When I arrived, there were already several people inside. A few were fellow colleagues, dressed to the nines. You didn't wear a few pieces of fur. Felt shameful to show your face. As for the jewelry, it sparkled so much that it made people want to wear sunglasses. Sister Chaya was chatting with a woman, and when she saw me arrive, she waved me over. I walked up and greeted her. The woman's gaze swept over me, and I noticed she was wearing last year's Chanel ensemble, topped with a valuable mink coat. Her gaze was somewhat contracted, trepid or envy, part satisfaction. I want to introduce you, Sister Chaya said, pulling me closer. And today's gathering is to welcome her. I smiled slightly, nodded at her, and extended my hand. Miss Dominic, I'm Cecilia. For unfamiliar people, I always introduced myself as Cecilia. I didn't like to draw attention to myself, nor did I enjoy comparisons of possession or men. It seemed pointless and was my ultimate goal. Therefore, besides Sister Chaya and a few close friends, not many knew my real name. Miss Dominic shook my hand, and a faint scent of dear perfume wafted over. Her hands were well-groomed, adorned with matching diamond rings. They were a bit chubby, making them look somewhat comical. Her sleeves were short, exposing the garish pink strap of her watch. I smiled sincerely, hiding any trace of sarcasm. You take such good care of yourself, Miss Dominic. Maybe you can share some beauty secrets with me sometime? She lit up instantly, asking, "How old do you think I am?" I tilted my head and examined her closely, then said earnestly, 26? No more than 28. Wow. She laughed wide enough for me to see her teeth, the wrinkles at the corners of her eyes clearly defined. Cecilia, you know how to flatter. Where am I going to find 26? I'm already 30. I widened my eyes in mock surprise, saying I couldn't tell at all and urging her to share some of her skincare tips with me. Saliva flying as I watched her lips coated with lipstick that didn't quite match her skin, only pulling in close. Feeling cold contempt inside. Miss Dominic, what name she had to flaunt. Sister Chaya listened with a smile. Once Miss Dominic finally paused, she stood up to greet other guests. At this moment, Miss Dominic looked around before quietly confiding in me about her purpose for coming. Cecilia, I just told Chaya that I'm here to find an assistant for my cousin. My aunt just passed away, and he's been in a bad mood. I see him suffering, and the elderly fear this kind of thing the most. So I thought it'd help him find an assistant who can take care of him at the company. What do you think? I nodded, understanding her intentions. Assistant was a pretty way to say mistress, and it seemed she wanted Sister Chaya to help find one for her. Looking at her eager expression, I couldn't help but wonder if she was thinking of me. Miss Dominic. Sister Chaya came over, draping her arm around my shoulder. Cecilia has a good eye and a few well-connected friends. She can help you vet them, and you won't go wrong. Miss Dominic froze for a moment, but she was slow on the uptake. She quickly understood that I was taken. She laughed and said, that's just perfect. Then, Cecilia, I'm counting on you. I promise I won't forget your kindness. Don't worry, I replied, saying there was no need to be polite. But inside, I was scoffing. This woman was a true Shanghainite. She hadn't changed at all. When she felt a little insecure, her Shanghai dialect would slip out unconsciously. Miss Dominic? No, it would be more fitting to call her Mrs. David. Miss Dominic. Oh no, Mrs. David would be more appropriate. She didn't remember me, but I remembered her. Today, at 38, she was 3 years older than David and was a cousin of the Dean of the Art Academy and of those distant relatives, 3,000 miles apart. Back in the day, David was able to stay at the Academy of Fine Arts smoothly, and it was said that his success was closely tied to her. Because of it, she could keep David wrapped around her finger, no matter how much he flirted outside. This time, it was surprising that Dominic personally came to select people and even sought out Sister Chaya. The uncle she mentioned was almost certainly the dean of the academy. I felt a surge of excitement. There had been too many old connections coming back recently, and I didn't know whether it was good or bad. After some introductions and competition, Dominic chose a girl named Darren. She had just turned 20, the age of blooming youth, and her skin was so delicate it seemed like you could squeeze water out of it. Her previous benefactor had been taken in for investigation, and he was detained for half a month. Just a few days ago, she looked as wilted as a dehydrated vegetable, but she seemed much livelier now. When she heard she had a new benefactor, her eyes sparkled with excitement. The process went smooth, and everyone was quite happy. Sister Che opened the bottles of red wine, and Dominic drank quite a bit. With dreamy eyes, he asked Sister Chaya, "Che, what's the next arrangement?" Sister Chaya paused for a moment. I guessed she had no real plans for a next event. But she quickly responded with a smile. "It's already arranged. How about we go to a tea house for some tea?" Dominic waved his hand, the diamonds on his fingers sparkling. "Tay, I'd done enough of that elegant stuff. Now, I want to do something else." The emphasis he placed on the word do was heavy, biting his lip with a somewhat lewd expression. I lowered my head and sipped my wine, the waves in the glass reminding me of Dominic's domineering attitude back then, when he would angrily scold Vixen. What a difference that was. Sister Chaya was sharp. She understood what he meant immediately and agreed to change the plan. I looked for a chance to say goodbye to Sister Chaya. She was well connected with both men and women. Knowing many handsome men in the trade, there were plenty of such places, and she was familiar with all the nightlife venues. However, I didn't want to get involved in that. Besides, my phone hadn't rung, and I hadn't received any messages from Cecil, which made me a bit uneasy. I wanted to mention it to Sister Chaya, but the occasion didn't seem right. Sister Chaya pulled me back, urging me not to leave. She had drunk a bit too, and I sensed she had something on her mind. I wondered if it was related to that call she missed at Starbucks this morning. She was worried she wouldn't be able to drive, and wanted me to take the wheel. At this point, I couldn't refuse any longer. I took the car keys and drove everyone to the place Sister Chaya mentioned. In Los City, there is a famous street known as Xiangu Street. At first, I didn't understand what the term meant, but later I learned it referred to a more civilized way of naming things. In ancient time, the male brothels were called Xiangu Pavilion, and this street in Los City was filled with ducks prostitutes, gathering all kinds of men pretty boys. Stylish types basically. A type of man a woman could want could be found here. Some wealthy women and official wives found it impossible to divorce. Their husbands were out having fun and couldn't be controlled, while they were lonely at home but unwilling to give in. Luckily, with money in hand, this place became their go-to for entertainment. Sister Chaya chose a venue called Floating Immortal, where women of all ages and statuses were referred to as immortals. The place was filled with men, and looking around, there were handsome guys everywhere. Women can be just as lustful, since it's all about connections now. If men were picky, there wouldn't be any place for women, especially in this industry. The competition among men was just as fierce as among women. As soon as Sister Chaya entered, several servers recognized her and hurried over to greet her. Their voices. Sister Chaya took out a few $100 bills from her bag and stuffed them into one server's waistband, making him smile even more as he lead us into a luxurious private room. The room was well equipped, providing food and drink as a basic offering. As for other things that men and women could enjoy, there was nothing you could think of that they couldn't provide. Of course, all of this was paid for with money. Not long after we sat down, the door to the room opened, and about 10 handsome men walked in, each one more striking than the last, making my head spin. I sneakily glanced at Dominic. Her eyes were glazed over, and I couldn't help but chuckle inwardly. David was also a handsome man. Otherwise, he wouldn't have captivated the girls at the academy. I wondered where her sudden thirst came from. Perhaps it was the alcohol giving her courage, but Dominic beckoned to one of the men in the middle. He immediately smiled and walked over. This man was indeed very handsome, with slightly deep-set eyes that had a hint of mixed heritage. Dominic coyly asked him how old he was, and he replied that he was 23. She sighed contentedly, seeming a bit nostalgic, and then she hooked her finger around his collar, saying, "Youth is really wonderful." The man leaned in and whispered in her ear, "You're not old either. I like women like you, full of charm." Dominic immediately laughed, asking him if he meant it. The man didn't answer. Instead, his fingers brushed against her shoulder, skillfully unzipping her dress. Before long, Dominic's eyes became dreamy, and she began to moan softly. Everyone except Sister Chaya found someone they were interested in. I thought that women probably crave this feeling, the idea of one day being able to hold cash and choose a man, trampling on their dignity. Money is truly a wonderful thing. It can buy a sense of dignity for both men and women. Sister Chaya knew my current situation and didn't try to dissuade me. Instead, she handed me a glass of wine, clinked it with mine, and downed it in one go. I was a bit surprised. It was rare to see Sister Chaya in such a state. Just as I was thinking about how to talk to her, I suddenly heard hurried footsteps from outside. followed by someone screaming. Sister Chaya's expression changed, and I felt a bit panicked, not yet processing what was happening when the door to the private room was suddenly pushed open. A large group of people rushed in, all with serious expressions and icy glares. The lively chatter that had filled the room just moments before fell silent in an instant. I could even hear their nervous breaths shaking. The man at the forefront was of medium height with a composed face, and his dark gaze swept around before settling on Sister Chaya. He frowned and said, "Chaya, it's you." Sister Chaya elegantly held her wine glass and raised it lightly toward him. It is me. What, are you taking me away?" Her voice was soft, seductive to the core, and she narrowed her eyes at the man. He pressed his lips together, his eyes narrowing with a dangerous glint. I felt a surge of anxiety. I knew very well that we had run into a raid. I never expected to be this unlucky. Depending on one's connections, this situation could be trivial or severe. Those with deep connections or strong backing usually had nothing to worry about. They would just lay low for a while, and everything would blow over. But for those without a safety net, it all depended on luck. I had seen some of Sister Chaya's girls have their futures ruined because of this. When something happened, the benefactor would be too angry to help and would never bother to put their necks on the line for them. In this industry, even a matter lasting 6 months could turn everything upside down in just a couple of months. You never knew how many people were watching you with envy, hoping to drag you down to take your place. So if you found someone not kicking you when you were down after a mishap, they were considered kind-hearted. Sister Chaya clearly wasn't afraid. She had the confidence, having been in this industry for a long time. She knew a few people up top, and it was only natural to rely on them for protection when necessary. Sister Chaya had this kind of clout. Indeed. The man stared at her face for a while before turning to signal to someone behind him. A young policeman came over, and the man whispered something in his ear. The young policeman's eyes widened in surprise, and when he looked back at Sister Chaya, there was some curiosity, but mostly disdain. Sister Chaya didn't care. She had no regard for such small fry. She downed the last of her drink and stood up, pulling me with her, while gently patting the man's chest with her other hand. "Thank you." The man extended his arm, blocking my way, and coldly said, "You can only leave alone." My heart jumped, and my palms started to sweat. Sister Chaya's expression changed as well. Her previous allure vanished entirely. "Captain Dan, that's probably not acceptable, is it, Chaya?" the man said without any courtesy. "Letting you go is already a special consideration. Let me be clear, no one else is leaving. You all have to come back with me to the station." "You?" Sister Chaya gritted her teeth, revealing a hint of determination. "Captain Dan, you don't want your career anymore, do you?" The man shot her a glance, silently huffing. The young policeman impatiently said, "Are you going or not? If you're not going, you're coming back with us, and threatening our Captain Dan. Do you really think you can defy us?" Sister Chaya remarked, "You're right, I can't defy others' fate, but I can easily turn yours upside down." Young policeman's face turned red with anger, ready to fire back, but the man cleared his throat and said, "All right, this is my attitude. If you want to leave, go on your own." Sister Chaya looked at me as if she had made a decision and lowered her voice. "Do you know who she belongs to?" I quickly grabbed her arm and shook my head. Sister Chaya glared at me. "Are you stupid?" Not saying anything at this time. I felt anxious. In this situation, saying anything might truly spell disaster for me. Cecil's attitude was unclear. He hadn't replied to my messages. He found out I got into trouble and ended up in a place like this. I didn't even want to imagine. "It's fine." I steadied my heart and said, "The police are reasonable. You go ahead. I'll go back with them. I haven't done anything. At most, they'll just investigate. It won't be anything serious." Sister Chaya frowned, saying it wasn't as simple as I thought. I knew it wasn't simple. I just cowed and alarmed Cecil now. I reluctantly suggested that if she could, after she got up, to help me contact Carlton. In the end, Sister Chaya agreed, nodding as she walked toward the exit. Just as she reached the door, one of her girls called out to her, her voice trembling slightly, I remembered that woman. She was 27 this year and had only started working with Sister Chaya last year. Chaya had helped her find some side gigs and a glamorous life. But she was well taken care of. She had just ended her contract with her benefactor last month, and today she probably hoped to test her luck. Unfortunately, everyone knew the stakes. It was tough to make a breakthrough without immense luck. If she went in today, there wouldn't be another chance. Many officials or successful businessmen held superstition. It was hard to explain. The higher they climbed, the more they feared losing everything. They believed in all kinds of omen. In their eyes, women like her were hardly lucky charms. Plus, her own qualifications weren't outstanding. Let's not even mention being 27. Even 17 or 18-year-olds felt a sense of crisis as they pushed their way forward. By the time she emerged, nobody would remember her place in the circle. But the current situation was such that Sister Chaya couldn't even take me with her, let alone help her. So, Sister Chaya just paused for a moment, and without even turning her head, she walked out. As soon as Sister Chaya left, the woman collapsed to the ground and began to wail uncontrollably. Watching her cry like that made my heart ache. Fate is so unpredictable, and no one knows what will happen next. We were like grasshoppers tied together, dragged out by the police. Outside, police cars flashed their lights, red and blue alternating and dazzling our eyes, and the sirens blared, sharp and piercing. Dominic was heavily intoxicated. After arriving here, he had consumed more than half a bottle of liquor with one of the prostitutes and was now completely out of it. Her Chanel suit was wrinkled like cheap knockoffs, and she had lost one of her high heels. Two officers were pulling her toward the car with all their strength. I really wanted to laugh. I couldn't help but wonder what David would think if he heard this news, but I couldn't laugh at all. My own situation was precarious, and I still hadn't heard anything from Cecil. Once we returned to the station, someone locked us in a room. A few middle-aged police officers peeked in, their eyes fixated on the women's thighs and chest, their expressions more lascivious than the laugh. I couldn't stand it. We were all locked together, men and women, drunk and disheveled, and the noise was giving me a headache. Officer, I walked to the door. How long are we going to wait? Captain Dan, who had brought us in, glanced at me but didn't respond. He coldly told the young officer who had clashed with Sister Chaya. Now you were in a hurry? Or were you earlier? I didn't do anything, I explained. Was I sitting in the corner when you came in? Sitting there and drinking isn't illegal. Is it? Drinking? The young officer said with a very sarcastic tone. How many people who go to bars admit they're out to do drugs and hook up? Everyone says they're just drinking. If it were really that simple, we police would have it easy. My anger flared up, but I didn't have Sister Chaya's confidence. I had to endure, even on their turf. Just then, a young female officer walked over with some documents in her hand. She gave me a disdainful look and said, "Enough already. Why argue with women like her? Try talking to them about self-respect and self-luvedo. You think they'd understand." I clenched my fist, about to speak, when a voice from behind said softly, "I have to say, Police Auntie, what you said is really interesting. Positive energy? What does that even mean? Giving up your seat on the bus? Forcing an elderly person across the street? And then you have to smile with charm, calling yourself Little Reed Scarf. Come on." I stopped using those cliches in my childhood essays. Auntie, well, here were you born. And as for self-respect and self-love, that depends on how you say it. Don't think that just because you're wearing a uniform and have a beer bottle cap on your hat, you're waving the flag of justice. I remember when Grandpa Jin Young wrote novel. Those righteous characters were the ones committing the most shameless act. Like Lima Shu. On the surface, she's a nun, and she should be celibate, right? But she, a young girl with a graceful figure, watery eyes, and lips tinted with a milky tea color, then approached. She had a thin layer of orange gloss over her lips, making her look particularly beautiful. Her lips parted slowly, her eyes fixed on the young female officer, continuing the previous thought. She takes all men. Takes all men. I chuckled inwardly. This girl had quite the sharp tongue, her words slicing like a knife. The young officer was no match for this. Her eyes widened, her face turning red and pale as she pointed at the girl and said, "You, who are you talking about?" The girl shrugged, fearlessly saying, "Whoever is pretending. I'm talking about whoever has a beer bottle cap on their hat." A beer bottle cap. It was quite the description. That was a solemn national emblem. I pressed my lips together to suppress my laughter as the young officer, flustered, spat, "You wait. Don't think you'll get out easily." "Really?" The girl blew on her nails. "That? I'm afraid you have no say in it. It has to be someone with weight. Yours is too light." As she spoke, she glanced at the officer's shoulder, clicked her tongue in disdain, and said, "You don't even have a single star. How dare you threaten me? You." The officer was genuinely enraged now, raising her folder and charging toward the girl's face. The girl leaned against a nearby desk, completely unprepared. I quickly reached out to block her. As a police officer, how can you hit someone casually? Are you planning to take the law into your own hands? The officer glared at me through gritted teeth, looking like she wanted to bite me. "You seem to know a lot. Dare you teach me a lesson? Don't think you're special just because you're pretty. I've seen plenty of women like you. Who knows how many men have been with you? What are you pretending for here?" Her words were truly cruel, making me want to tear her mouth apart. The girl beside me was also furious, her gaze as if she wanted to penetrate the young officer's flesh. "Where have you seen such a woman? This sister is 100 times more beautiful than you. You can't compare if you went back to your mother and started over. You want to pretend, but do you have the capital for it?" I took a breath. This girl was really fierce. The young officer was practically boiling with rage, looking 3 years older all of a sudden. Captain Dan, who had stepped aside to take a call, came over and said sternly, "Everyone calm down. What's all this noise about? Get back to what you were doing." The young officer shot daggers at me and the girl before turning to leave. I felt a sense of relief but was also anxious. I couldn't afford to wait much longer. Night was falling, and I didn't know if Cecil would go straight home after work. "Captain Dan, can we take the statement now? I really didn't do anything." Before I could finish, a police officer rushed in and whispered something in Captain Dan's ear. The color of Dan's face changed immediately. "Really?" The officer nodded, and they both hurried out without a glance at me. I rubbed my temple, feeling a bit dejected. When the girl next to me asked, "Hey, what's your name?" "Cecilia," I replied, feeling a good vibe from her. Her eyes curving like a fluffy crescent moon. "I'm Fanny." I nodded and said, "Thank you." She laughed brightly and said it was no problem, then asked if I was anxious to get out. I told her, of course. She glanced at her watch, which was a large, neutral-face model that looked quite stylish, but I clearly saw the logo on it. Items from this brand were not cheap. "No need to rush. Someone will come to get me out soon, and then I'll take you with me," Fanny said confidently. "Thanks." Before I could finish my thanks, I heard footsteps in the hallway, and Captain Dan returned. Soon after, I heard a voice asking, "Where are they?" Just those 3 words made cold sweat break out on my back. "See, why was he here?" Oh my God. I felt like my heart was about to stop, and my legs felt a bit weak. No, I had to find a place to hide. I cowed and let him see me. I quickly backed away to the side of the table cabinet, where there were quite a few people. He probably would take a second glance and shouldn't notice me. My heart was pounding, and I held my breath, lowering my head to avoid looking at him. People like him have an especially keen sense. Just one glance could give me away. What I didn't expect was that Captain and invite Cecil to sit in the office but stopped at the door. Even more surprising was that Fanny, who had just been standing next to me, walked over to the door. "You're here," she said. Cecil didn't respond, instead telling Captain Dan, "I'm taking the person." "Understood," Captain Dan replied, not daring to say another word. I was feeling icy all over, lowering my head even further, not daring to breathe. I couldn't even think that the person coming to rescue Fanny was Cecil. A pair of shiny dress shoes appeared in front of me, with perfectly pressed trousers. A cold voice came from above. "Look up." I closed my eyes for a moment, resigned, and lifted my head to see a pair of deep eyes. See, in his police uniform. stood before me, exuding an air of authority. Like a king of the world, his gaze had no emotion, deep as a bottomless pool. But I could sense the turbulent waves within. One wave could swallow me whole. "Let's go," he said, uttering just one word, then turned and walked outside. I was still in a daze when Fanny came over, putting her arm around my shoulders. "Look at you. Good." I hadn't even said anything, and he brought it up himself. "You're impressive. Being beautiful makes a difference. Let's go," she said cheerfully, pulling me down the hallway. Just as a female police officer walked by, Fanny proudly whistled. "Goodbye, officer." The policewoman was staring dreamily at Cecil as he walked past, and Fanny's comment nearly made her explode with anger. Sensing her frustration, Fanny pulled off an even bolder move, releasing me and running a few steps to catch up with Cecil. She wrapped her arm around his, turning back to raise an eyebrow at the policewoman. This gesture surprised not only the policewoman but also me. What shocked me even more was that Cecil remained indifferent. He didn't reprimand her or shake her off. Who exactly was this Fanny? I was filled with huge questions as we made our way out of the station. I spotted a black SUV parked at the roadside, but I didn't recognize the brand. I only knew a few common logos. Sister Chaya had said that it didn't matter if I didn't recognize them. Such vehicles were usually flaunted by nouveau rich. Truly wealthy and powerful men were particularly low-key about such things. As soon as Fanny stepped out, she released Cecil, giving him an exaggerated salute and laughing heartily. "Thank you. I'll express my gratitude to our boss too." Cecil glanced at her, smoothing out the wrinkle she had created on his shirt sleeve, and said lightly, "Do you dare tell your boss? I would let mine." Fanny stuck her tongue out. "Cecil, don't be so serious. It's just a formality. See you." As she said that, she threw me a significant look, a hint of a knowing smile, then turned and strode away. What a special woman. But I didn't have the mental capacity to think about her right now. Cecil was already getting into the car. I stood by the roadside, unsure whether to get in or not, feeling a bit at a loss. Just then, the car window slowly rolled down, and the driver said to me, "Miss Cecilia, please get in." I hesitated and walked over to open the door, still unsure of what to say when Cecil suddenly lunged at me like a jaguar, pulling me inside. I felt a rush of dizziness, and before I could react, his hand gripped my neck. With the angle I was at, all I could see was the dark car ceiling, and it felt like I was breathing more out than in, making my head feel a bit foggy. Cecil's grip was strong, and an icy aura radiated from him. I even had the illusion that his breath against my ear was cold. "Cecilia, weren't you waiting for me to come back? What's this?" Then naturally took the phone away, smiling as he said, "You never used to watch these kind of emotional videos. You Carlton hold back? Did I not satisfy you enough?" His voice boomed like thunder, each word sounding like it was ground out between his teeth, carrying a bloody scent. I couldn't speak, just shook my head. But with his grip, the motion was slight. His hand finally loosened a bit, and the incoming air made me cough a few times, tears streaming down my face. Once I caught my breath, I hurried to explain that I hadn't done anything. I just sat inside and had a drink. He coldly stared at me, and after I finished, without saying a word, he suddenly bit down. He sank his teeth into my neck and shoulder, causing a mix of pain and numbness that gradually made my breathing rapid. I felt his fingertips deftly unfasten my buttons, sliding from my collarbone down to my chest and further below my abdomen. I felt hot all over, my blood surging with excitement. Unable to resist, I wrapped my arms around him. He seemed quite pleased with my response, leaning down to kiss me. As his tongue brushed against my skin, I shivered slightly. The partition in the middle of the car rose. The driver was sitting in front, and there were people coming and going outside. I felt both scared and anxious, but also a little thrilled. Cecil lifted my qipao, his hand probing underneath, flipping me over so I was bent over the seat. He pressed against me tightly from behind. I had no strength left. Without saying a word, he hit me from behind. I nearly screamed but desperately bit my lip to hold it back. Outside, it had already grown dark, with bright street light illuminating everything. I lay over the seat, while Cecil moved in and out of me freely. I don't know how long it went on, but I heard him grunt softly, and a sharp pain shot through my shoulder. I shivered. He squeezed my waist and said, "Drive?" I was in a daze as the car moved and then eventually stopped. Just as I was about to struggle to get my clothes back on to get out, I found myself in warm arms. Cecil carried me inside the house, and the maid immediately approached, asking what was wrong with Miss Cecilia. He didn't answer but told her to run a hot bath. Before long, he tossed me into the bathtub. The bathroom lights were bright, shining down on me, and he looked down at me from above, his gaze taking in everything. I was mortified, covering my chest with my arms, and softly called out, "See?" He asked expressionlessly, "Is that enough?" My mind was in a haze, unable to process. What did he mean by enough? This hesitation didn't matter to him. He reached down and pulled off my belt. Then right in front of me, he yanked my pants and underwear off in one motion. Something jumping out immediately, I guess, closing my eyes and shrinking into the water. As the water splashed, he stepped into the bathtub, grasped my chin, and commanded, "Open your eyes." I dared not disobey. Slowly opening my eyes, his eyes were dark and bright, now obscured by steam and shrouded in a thin mist, with swirling depths that seemed to pull me in. He was the second person encountered whose eyes held a whirlpool, making me irresistibly want to be drawn into it. My heart ached painfully, and I didn't know why. Suddenly, tears streamed down my face. Cecil seemed startled for a moment, his brow raising slightly. The fingers that held my chin slowly loosened and slid down. He really knew how to toy with me. That was the last thought I had before I slipped into unconsciousness. When I woke up, it was deep into the night. I felt utterly exhausted, my body sore, not wanting to move at all. But my mind was clear. I realized I was at my own plea, and there was still a Cecil beside me. So I didn't dare relax too much. He was lying next to me. I turned my head to see a figure standing on the balcony, back to me, holding a cigarette, the red tip glowing faintly in the dark. Before I could decide whether to keep pretending to be asleep, he turned and asked, "Awake?" Then, I nodded, searching under the covers. I had no clothes on at all. How was I supposed to get out like this? He walked over and tossed me on it ductily, with no lace embellishments, but very thin and sheer. I had no choice but to awkwardly put it on. He went to a small table by the window and said, "Come here." As I approached, I noticed there was a bowl on the table, steaming with porridge. It was rich and thick, making my mouth water. I hadn't eaten anything since leaving Starbucks, and after everything that had happened, plus being toyed with by him all the way here, I was starving. My stomach pressed against my back. Cecil checked the time. It's not even midnight yet. It's still the day for eating labacongi. I was taken aback. I didn't expect him to care about that. I lowered my head and said thank you. The porridge was indeed delicious. If it weren't for him being around, I would have finished it in no time. However, I had to take it slow. Just as I was almost done, Cecil stubbed out his cigarette in the ashtray and asked, "Who is David?" Hearing this caught me off guard, and I almost choked, coughing for a while. Taking advantage of the coughing fit, I quickly turned my mind, thinking about how to respond. Suddenly, I remembered the deceased still laying, and an icy chill ran through me. "Have you thought it through?" Cecil asked. He sat across from me, separated by a small table, but I felt as though he could reach out at any moment, pull me over, and swallow me whole, leaving no trace behind. His eyes were too piercing. With his profession, even hardened criminals couldn't withstand his gaze, let alone me. I swallowed hard, imagining him in his police uniform, feeling my breath quicken. He's a professor at the art academy. I heard he's gained some notoriety in the last couple of years and has held tour exhibition, earning a bit of money. Cecil remained silent. I knew he was waiting for me to continue. After pondering for a moment, I added, "His wife is the cousin of the art academy's dean. Today, she went to Sister Chaya's to find someone for the dean to hire as an assistant. Oh, and during the crackdown, David was also arrested." What I said was true, but not the whole truth. I knew that to deceive someone like Cecil, I still had a long way to go. I didn't intend to trick him. He could easily investigate, and every detail could be verified. However, I paid attention to the order of the content. Although everything was true, it would sound very different when rearranged, and that was my little trick. After I finished speaking, I looked at Cecil with a sincere and innocent expression. While internally I was anxious to death, my heart was racing after such a long day. Cecil still had no expression, leaning slightly forward and staring at me intently. Not blinking, I maintained my original expression and posture, not daring to show any signs of relaxation. A thin layer of frost slowly spread in his eye, softening with a hint of warmth, and the corners of his eyes slightly lifted, holding a faint smile. "So, did you find a suitable person?" I wasn't sure if he believed me or not. "Yeah, a girl named Erin. But she also got caught this time, so probably have to find someone new." In an instant, the warmth in Cecil's eyes froze again. "And yeah, do you think David will choose you?"